Hey, what is going on, everybody? Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys, and welcome to the next video where we are currently building a Deco house inside of Blender to be used inside of our map projects and ultimately inside the FS22/25 game itself. All right, so since our last video, which has been a little while now, I apologize. This is the third time I am actually shooting this video, maybe the fourth. There's been a few issues along the way. I'm not going to get into it all now, but it's been a rough road. So now I'm finally finding the time to be able to do this again. So let's give this a shot. There's some things that are done and not done since the last video because I've recorded it so many times. I've been working on this as I go. But anyhow, let's just keep trudging forward and I'll explain things as I get to them. All right. So since the last video, I added a few things. All right. And what I added was these little, I guess flanges, you can call them, on the bottom of the railing. Right. So I put those there, this one and this one. This one was already there. I added an additional gutter in the back here, right, and a rain spout. So that's been added. And that is about it. I think what I did, let me see here. Did I do it or not? I did. On the tops and bottoms of these posts here, right? On every one of these posts, there's a face. There's a visible face. All right. So what I did is I went through here and I grabbed the tops of these, right? Of each one of these tops like that. And I deleted the faces. Now, the reason that I do that, it's not such a big deal. I mean, it can't be seen, first of all, but that's most of the reason that I did it. One, it can't be seen. So why do you want to put a texture on something that you can't see to begin with? All right. And the second issue that it may cause is there's a lot of them, right? So with all of these additional faces that you have here, and there's a lot, when you add them all up, there's a bunch. That all gets put into your UV map, right? So when we look at our UV map over here, which is looking kind of crazy, all those little squares there are going to show up. They're going to take space, basically. They're going to take up space in our UV map, which we don't want to do, right? We want to keep that down to a minimum. The less objects that we have to put into our map, into our UV space, the better off we're going to be, right? So you know, why bother taking up all that extra room? And it's all that extra room, but it does add up, right? So all those little pieces add up, you know, to a chunk of space that could be used for something that's actually visible. All right. And this is what I was explaining to you one other time about the underside of the roof, right? So when you look at the bottom side of this roof, if you didn't do it not properly, but if you did it differently, you see with mine, when I go into face select here, right, just the outside, just the visible part has two sides to the roof, right? We have the top and then we have this part here. Now, the underside, that's not actually visible. This is just the back half, right? So you can see it's all in red. All right. So now what, like I was saying, if you did yours not incorrectly, but if you did it in such a way that the bottom of your roof also has a face, all of this extra room is going to be taken up inside of your UV map, which you don't want. All right. So it's just extra space. It's wasted space. And think about it this way. If I had built like a huge mansion, right? And there's just lots and lots of parts to it. All of those parts end up in my UV map. Now this UV map for this is only going to be a 2048 by 2048, right? That's my ultimate final texture size is going to be a 2K 2048. Now, if this was a huge mansion and tons of pieces, squeezing them down into a 2048, it may be doable. But if I have too much going on inside of there, it's going to make my texture, my final result is going to look really bad. All right. So in that case, I would probably just use a bigger texture, like a 4K 4096. But like I said, for this house, it's going to be a 2K 2048. And the less objects that I have inside of this UV space here, right, the better off my texture is going to look. So if this roof here, for example, you know, covers a pretty large area, that's going to be a pretty detailed roof. It won't look bad. But if I squeeze it down, and now it's only as big as you see here, maybe not look as good, right? It starts to lose a little bit of resolution, that crispness and things that make it look crisp and clear image, right? So it starts to get a little fuzzy, the resolution starts looking not so great. All right. So that's why we want to keep all of these extra objects out of our UV map. If you don't have to, if they're not visible, don't put them in there. That's why we delete the bottoms of the houses. One, it cuts down on geometry, and two, it helps with, not having them take up that extra space inside of your UV map. All right. So that's that. I'm not sure what point I wanted to make there. That was the point, I guess. I was talking about deleting the pieces of the railing. All right. So that's the reason I do that. All right. Now you don't have to go crazy and delete absolutely every single thing that's not visible. Right. If it's only just like a piece here and there, no big deal. As long as it's a small piece. Right. So I'll do like the bottoms of these doorways. Now I've done so many of these houses that I'm used to what's visible, what's not visible, things that I normally delete, things that, I don't. But I'll do the bottoms of these doorways here. These, the bottom of the trim. I'll do any one of these posts here, right? These bigger posts, I'll delete the bottoms of those. These little railing posts, I'll delete the tops and the bottoms. Probably the same thing for the garage door. I think I'll do the bottoms down in here. All right. I'll do these. I'll delete those. And I'll just go around and I'll just start picking, the obvious ones. Don't get crazy. Don't just go buck nutty on this thing and, every single little thing that's hidden, but the obvious ones, right? Ones that are first, that they're obvious, and two, that it's going to take up space on your UV map or extra space more than you wanted to. Go ahead and delete them. All right. So that's one of the things I did while we were gone. Now, the next step, what I would do from here, we're going to be kind of like skipping a step in here. I should have done it already, but this is part of this video is my workflow, right? For this Deco house. And normally it's 50-50. I'm pretty bad at this, but what I'll do is I will do my occluder mesh, right? That should have been done by now. That should have been done at the very early stages of this house. And now an occluder mesh, the reason I skipped it is because I use a separate program. The same people that do the make Instamat, make a program called LOD Maker. Well, that LOD Maker also does your occluder meshes, and it does a really, really good job of it. Now, for me personally, it's been hit and miss. Sometimes it's outstanding, sometimes not so much, but it's not the program's fault, right? The program does exactly what it should be doing. It's me that doesn't really know how to work the program that well, right? I'm fairly new to it, so I'm still kind of navigating the waters a little bit and getting used to how things work with that program. But I do like to try to give it a shot. Now, the fact that I missed making the occluder mesh to this point, not a big deal. All right. Because the occluder mesh is nothing but, bringing in a new object, right? You would just bring in a normal square or a cube and then just stretch it out to the basic size of this house, make it a tiny bit smaller so it fits inside in just the shape. You don't want any of the extra stuff. You don't need the driveway. You don't need the porch. Well, maybe you could do part of the porch, like the bigger base if you wanted to. But again, it's completely not necessary. Just what you see on the house here. Let me see if I can bring up. Hey, it did work. Yeah, just the basic shape of the house here. Just this, all right? So you want to build this, and you want to make it long like this. And then that's it. That is your occluder mesh, right? So it's not a big deal. You're not missing out on much. But since this is the workflow that I currently use, I'm going to show you the way that I do it now. And that is not necessarily part of the step. Or, like I said, about 50-50. Sometimes I'll make it and then I'll still use the program because it's easier. The easiest way to do it, right, is when you're setting up your original house that we have here. All right, before you start adding on any of like the trim and the windows and the porch and stuff like that, just create a copy of it. And it's like the second step, right? So you get your cube stretched out to the dimensions that you need it. And then you would stretch up the roof. You'd pull the roof up, to what you see here. And at that point, I would just duplicate it. I'd make a copy of it. I call that my occluder mesh. And then that's it. And then I would just move on to, continuing on the work with the house. Okay. But like I said, I didn't do that step one. I guess I sort of forgot. And then two, I forgot because I'm so used to using another program, but that's fine. Right. So if when I get to that point where I get to the program, if it doesn't do exactly what I want it to do, I'll show you how to go back and make the occluder mesh for this house. Not a big deal. Not missing much, right? It's very, very simple. Okay. So with that aside, the very next step I would do from here is cleaning up my mesh. All right. And what I mean about cleaning up the mesh, now this mesh here is already, one, it was pretty clean to begin with. And two, I have done some work on it. Like I said, this is the third time I'm shooting this video. So there's been some work done. And once it's saved, it's saved. I can't go back and put that work back into it. All right. So I'm going to try to walk you through this. I guess I could use a different mesh, a different project as an example. But this is so cut and dry and fairly easy that I'm pretty sure you guys are going to grasp the concept either way. All right. So what I mean about cleaning up the mesh is getting rid of any extra faces, vertices, and edges that are either adding to the geometry or they're not necessary. Right. So when you start getting into, putting in like loop cuts and stuff like that, you end up with a lot of additional lines or edges that just aren't needed. So you can go ahead and you can start getting rid of them. Now you got to be careful. Like when you get down here to like the bottom, I've done this already, or I've deleted lines, or I call them lines, but edges. You have to give some forethought to what textures are going where, right? And how you're going to go about unwrapping this house, which is the next step after this. All right. So there's going to be a foundation that goes down here. So my texture is going to be like a concrete type texture. All right. So I want to make sure I don't delete this edge because it's needed. All right. But other edges like around the windows, if you have extra ones that shoot horizontally, maybe from the bottom of the window out to the edge of the house, that can go. Right. So it's just a matter of highlighting it, right click, D for dissolve, and then there you go. Now, with this, you can see it was okay. It didn't disturb anything, right? So the window looks okay. It's all intact. The house is intact. So why not do that? Well, the reason you don't want to do that is because you still want to keep your basic polygon, right? So either your tris, which is a triangle, which is, 3 sides, or your quads, which is what you see here, just a regular square with 4 sides. All right. But what I ended up with when I deleted this was an n-gon, right? So that would be something with a lot more than, well, not a lot more, but it did have more than 4 sides, more than 4 sides. All right. And what'll happen there is it may have some problems triangulating. All right. Not the end of the world, but you really want to avoid it if at all possible. It may be a problem, may not be. And that problem really isn't going to show itself until you get to the point where you're texturing, right? So when you start texturing, that's when you're going to find out if this caused a problem or not. And it's a pain in the butt, right? You really don't want to have to fix this. Not horrible. It is fixable, but avoid it at all costs. All right. Now, to give you an example of this, right? So if I go into face select, if you look at the bottom of my foundation right here, right? At the very bottom, I want you to focus on this area here, right? My foundation. All right. If you look at the dot, there's a dot right here. Okay. Well, that dot is my normal. All right. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but I believe when it triangulates and it figures out the area for your texture, it goes from it'll do something like this. It'll start at the normal. So it goes from like the corner to the normal, maybe over to this corner. Now, like I said, I'm not an expert, so I might be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure it has something to do with this. All right. Well, with this normal being too high up, it's much higher than it should be. All right. So that normal should be, it's not much higher, but it should be sitting a little bit lower. Right. So it should be sitting right about this area. Now, the reason this happened is because I deleted additional edges that I didn't need. Right. So I had some vertical edges. Let me go into my knife tool here. We'll stay in face select. All right. So I had some additional vertical edges in here. All right. Now, when I add that edge, now you can see look at these two normals compared to each other, right? So this one here is right smack dab in the middle where it belongs, which makes triangulation very easy, right? Much easier than this one. If I was going to have a problem with either one of these, it's going to be this one here, okay? And that's part of how it's fixed. When you get into Substance Painter and things aren't quite going the way you want them to, you would come back into, as far as the textures, I mean, not going the way you want them to. And what'll happen is it won't apply a texture that it'll look white. I'll show you. It happens frequently. I don't know if it's something I'm doing wrong or anyhow. What I'll do to fix it is I will add these extra edges in here. Like you can see what I'm doing here is just, going vertically, sticking an edge in there. Okay, so now this one here looks good. This one here looks good. In the middle is still a little bit but it may or may not give you an issue. So point being there is as you're deleting extra edges, just be mindful of that. Now you don't have to be, scared to delete certain things because, you may end up with a problem. It still looks nice. I still have a nice quad down there that I can work with. And generally it goes okay, right? It's hit and miss when it actually causes a real problem for me. All right. And it's like I said, it's not the end of the world. It can be fixed. I don't want to say simply enough, but it's not difficult, right? So just be mindful of the edges that you delete because when you get a little bit too crazy with it, you can throw off the overall position of your normal. Now, I know you can recalculate normals, but I don't think it calculates it back into the center of the face itself. Maybe you can, but I'm not sure how that's done. I've looked into it and I didn't find an answer, so I'm not quite sure that's something that can be done, but maybe. All right. So like I said, that's what I'm doing here is I'm going through any stray lines, and they're usually just leftover loop cuts that I'm getting rid of. I'm getting rid of those edges, right? So even on this porch, now this porch, I would leave this one here because one, it's an edge for the top of either the top of this little board runner thing that I have here, and it's also the corner of the porch. But if it was just a single line, I would probably still leave it and what I mean by a single line is if it was a line that stopped right here, right? If it was only about that long, all right, I would probably still leave it because if I deleted it, it would create an n-gon, right? So I'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've had 6 sides to this object or to this polygon now, and you don't want to do that. Right. So you want to try and, when at all possible, keep everything as tris and quads. All right. So that's why my windows look the way they do. I got rid of all my horizontal lines and I left these 4-sided polys here. Right. So I left these quads in place because they're easy to texture. They're not going to cause a lot of problems. And it's adding very little extra geometry. All right. So like I said, the name of the game here is to keep your geometry as low as you can. Now, does it matter? I get this question a lot, between vertices, edges, faces, triangles. Which one matters? Which one do I look at? Well, they're all basically, they add up to the same thing. All right. If you think about it, like your edges, an edge is created between 2 vertices, right? When you connect 2 vertices, then you have an edge, right? So when you take 3 to 4 vertices and you connect those, then you have a face. All right. So even triangle, same thing. 3 vertices is a triangle. So it all comes down to your vertices. So really, ultimately, that's the number that I look at is the vertice count. Some people look at the triangles. Ultimately, there's not a huge difference. Just pick one of these numbers and stick with it, right? Just make that number go as low as you can and you'll be in good shape. All right. I look at vertices. All right. Well, I'm going to keep that count down as low as you can, depending on your model, it can get up, a bit up on the higher side. It's, not a huge problem unless you're really high, right? When you start getting into the 100,000s or even something like this house, if this house would have hit, let's say like even 10,000 vertices, well, 10,000 maybe isn't horrible. But any higher than that, I'd be thinking I got a little bit too much into this house, right? And 10,000 for me is still pretty high. As you can see, I'm pretty much done, and I'm only at 1,700 vertices. All right. But I have done projects where, the vertice count has gotten up there pretty high. All right. You can go through and look at some of the models currently in Giants Editor of their models, the base game models, and you can see what their counts look like, and they're much higher than anything that I'm putting into the game. All right. So you can relax a little bit, right, when your poly count gets up there a little bit higher. But like I said, you do want to keep it on a low side. All right. So like I said, go through any extra faces, like the bottoms of the your porches, the bottoms of your posts, the bottoms of your roofs, anything that needs to be deleted that you do not want to show up inside of your UV space. You want to go ahead and delete that. You know what I forgot to turn on? I forgot to turn on my, let's see if I got my screencast. All right, there we go. All right. So when you want to go through and you want to delete those things. And then again, edges, anything like that, any extra edges that you're not going to need, get those dissolved, delete, however you're comfortable doing it. Now, I do use a separate add-on that you can see right here on the right-hand side of my screen right there. It's called Instant Clean. All right. And Instant Clean is something that I use pretty much religiously, right? I love this program. It does an amazing job at what it's made for, which is cleaning up your mesh. All right. Now, one of the things that it does that you can do on your own without, spending a whole ton of time doing it, and I recommend you do this for every one of your projects, right, is go into your vertices select. Now, it doesn't matter if you're in X-ray mode or, if you're just in like a solid mode. But what you want to do is you want to A for all. You want to select all of them, right? And then you want to hit M for merge, and then B for by distance. You want to merge by distance. And then down bottom here, it'll tell you how many vertices are removed. Now, I've already cleaned this mesh, like I said, so it only removed one vertice. But in your case, it can remove several hundred vertices depending on what you have going on. All right. So if you have, for some reason, you have a lot of doubles, and I get them, I get lots of doubles. So don't think it's necessarily something you're doing wrong. Maybe it's something you could be doing differently. But as your skills progress, you'll do it less and less, right? So my meshes now, compared to when I started out, are much, much cleaner than when I started. They were a mess, man. When I first got in the Blender, I'm like, holy hell, this thing is just horrible. So they have gotten better, but that's one thing that you can do that's going to immediately make a giant impact on, not a giant impact, but it'll make a difference, right? It'll get rid of a lot of those like double vertices, double edges, double faces that you can't see with the naked eye, right? You didn't know it was there. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot that I don't know exist, and I don't know where to look for them because I don't know they're there, So that's a huge help all in itself, right? So like I said, highlight all of your vertices, just go into vertices select, A for select all, and then merge by distance. And that'll help you out a lot when it comes to cleaning your mesh. Okay. So like I said, the add-on that I use, now this is going to be completely up to you whether or not you want to use an add-on. This one is not free. Some of them are not. This one is not, but it can be found over on Blender Market. If you go over to, oops, that's my recording software. So it can be found on Blender Market. So if you go over to Blender Market, and just type in Instant Clean in the search box, and it'll bring up something that looks like this. It does go for $9.99, so about $10. And it has a video demo. I'm not really going to get into it, but they do have other products as well. Instant Clean, Section Box, stuff like that. But anyhow, long story short is it basically cleans your mesh for you. Now I'll walk you through it quickly, but I don't want to spend too much time on what Instant Clean does. But you can drop down each one of these little arrows here. You can drop down and see what it does, hover over it, and it'll tell you what it's fixing, what it's not fixing, right? So we got unconnected geometry, doubles, zero faces, and on and on. All right. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, if you look over here on my scene collection, you see I have main house and then the main house.001. I have a copy, right? And right now I'm currently working on a copy. The main reason that I have this copy is for Instant Clean, right? So before you get all crazy with this program or this add-on, make a copy of your house. Because the very first thing that I did when I got it, I'm like, I just hit repair, right? So if I have my object selected, like main house here, I hit repair. All right. Well, nothing came up in this, but generally it will, right? There'll be a lot of stuff that comes up in here. And immediately you see these big numbers and you're like, wow, this is great. It's doing such a good job. And then you'll move down to manifold, dissolve, and you'll keep going and going and going. You're like, wow, look at all the stuff it took out. This is just an amazing program. And you save it. And then maybe a little while later, you come back and you realize, damn it, it took out things that you didn't want it to take out. And now your mesh needs to be fixed, first of all. And a lot of times it's maybe not fixable. Maybe there's things that it took out that you don't have any clue how to try and fix. And it just made things miserable for you. All right. So always, before you get into instant clean, make a copy of your mesh. So this way, if you totally screw the pooch, you can always come back and work. You can pick up on the copy that you didn't goof up. All right. So make a copy of it. All right. And then the second reason that copy is there is for demonstration purposes. Because like I said, it's the third time I'm shooting this video. It might be the fourth. For some reason, I think I shot it 3 times already. And this is number 4. Like I said, I had some issues. One, I had microphone issues. I had, it's been a mess, right? But that's okay. I'm going to make the best out of what I have here. So like I said, I have a copy that I can use to show you a few things, because my other copy here, I believe, yeah, you can see there's just a bit more unwrapped on it. And that's what I'm going to show you next. So I'm going to show you on one that doesn't have as much unwrapping done to it. All right. So like I said, go through instant clean, drag down each one of these boxes. Usually repair is pretty good. You can check and uncheck these if you don't want it to do something, right? So repair in itself is pretty good. You can use that one. Manifold, you want to be careful of, right? So you can see in here, I have non-manifold faces I have unchecked, and there's a reason for that, right? So if I go ahead and say, okay, clean manifold, well, you can see what it did, right? That's not good. Now, the reason that it did it is because I have the bottom of the house deleted, right? So that made this whole entire thing here a non-manifold face. You just want to be careful, right? Because there's a lot of things that it will delete that you didn't notice. And you're like, damn it, I didn't notice. I've had it completely delete like windows or driveways or a porch, and I didn't even notice. Like a big object that I should have been aware of, I didn't even notice that it did it. So just be very careful of that one. Maybe it's, like I said, it's the way I'm modeling, but I generally end up with a good handful of non-manifold faces. So I will take that out of the selection and then I'll run it. And then you can see it took out 52 non-manifold verts. All right. And then when I go through here, you can't see, right? You can't see any significant changes, right? So everything looks the way that it did. And make sure you do this. It's very important that you go through and you have a quick peek at everything, right? And make sure everything looks just the way it did before you started cleaning. All right. And that looks pretty good. So you got rid of an extra 52 vertices that you don't even know what the hell they were doing before this, right? All right, so that's manifold. Dissolve is one that I don't use at all. It's not that I don't go in here and, you can go through and check and uncheck certain things, but I don't use it at all, right? So with dissolve, you can see if I was to use that, right? It did a decent job, but I end up with a ton of engons. It got rid of, look what it did over here. I don't have the edges anymore for my foundation. So I don't even bother with dissolve. Anything that I want gone, I will go through and I will take out by hand. Normally things that are like a much, much bigger mesh that's got a crazy amount of detail in it. That's basically where you're going to start using tools like that, right? So something with our little house here, it's much more manageable to be able to go through and do these things by hand. Okay. And then object data, that's if you have any extra, like say materials inside of your list here that aren't associated with anything in your model, it'll just delete them because they're not needed. All right. So just keep that in mind. Instant clean, if you want to try it out, $10. I use it, like I said, faithfully. Every project I use instant clean. It helps out a lot. Right. But again, if you don't have the $10 or you just, you're not sure if you want to put that kind of money into an add-on this early on, it's not a problem, don't worry about it. Don't hesitate to just do what I said and just go, delete all your vertices. Don't, not all vertices, just select all vertices and delete or merge by distance, right? Because that's a good way to clean up your mesh, without any extra software. And it does a really good job of getting rid of a lot of things that you can't see. All right. So you can stick with that, whatever you can see by eye and then merging by distance, and you're good to go. All right. So don't stress it if you don't have the funds for throwing at an add-on of all things. Don't be like me. I get a little out of hand with things, a little bit crazy. I got quite a bit of money tied up in the add-ons, which I can't say if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, some add-ons like, instant clean here, well worth the money. Other ones, I spent a good chunk of money on it and I rarely use them. So you take the good with the bad, I guess. Okay, so that was step number 2 in this house, was just cleaning up our mesh, and we're prepping it for the next step, which is UV unwrapping. Okay, now UV unwrapping, I feel like the video that I did as part of the Blender tutorial series, I feel like I didn't do the greatest job explaining unwrapping to you guys, right? So it really depends on, first of all, how you plan on texturing your model, right? So if you plan on utilizing the Giants textures, then you don't have to unwrap at all. You can just go through, select your faces, and I showed you a video on how to do that, right? And you don't need to unwrap anything if that's the way you're going to be doing it, right? If you're going to be using the Giants textures, it's a very simple process. Now, if you're going to be exporting into a program like Substance Painter or Instamat or something like that, well, then the unwrapping part is critical, right? So you need to do a good job with your mesh. And then secondly, you need to do a very good job unwrapping, right? So things need to look good in your UV space. Now, I'm going to show you how I set up my UV space quickly, right? So I go into UV editing, first of all. All right. And then what I'll do is I'll go over to UV here, right? Click on that. Scroll down to live unwrap, and you want to check that. Check live unwrap. And then you want to head over here onto the right-hand window and go to options and then check on live unwrap. All right. So get that clicked also. So on each one of these, you have live unwrap going. And then up here, this little double arrow that you see here, right? When I hover over it, you can see it says UV sync selection. Make sure that is turned on. All right. So what it's doing now is every time that I make a change to my mesh, right? It's showing you in real time these changes, right? So if I was to mark that, you can see something right down in here disappeared, right? And as I mark each one of these, it will update in real time. See how my mesh is starting to take shape here? All right. Now what I'll do is I'll go through and I'll set that up initially, right? I don't really pay much attention to it after that. I get it set up. And I no longer keep this window open because it's constantly going to make changes. It's going to have its uses a little later on. But right now, we're not really going to worry about, what's going on inside of this window over here. All right. You can see that things are starting to take shape, but we're not going to worry about that right now. All right. What we're going to worry about is we're going to get into just stay in our modeling window. And now, like I said, keep it set up because it's going to be useful down the road. But right now, we're not going to worry about it. All right. So what I explained in my part of my Blender series, all right, with UV unwrapping. Now, I should have the square set up to show you with the cube. I'm sure most of you guys have an idea of what unwrapping is and what it does. But to give you just a kind of a quick breakdown, right? So if you take this porch that I have here, right? If this porch, if I was to put like, say, a brickwork on it, right? So the bricks have, vertical lines and horizontal lines that if as it went around the corner, right, it would be easy to tell if your bricks didn't match up, right? So your horizontal lines would look like this. I know they look like crap, but it may not look that great, right? Because anything with a pattern, if the pattern, isn't done correctly, if it doesn't line up correctly, it throws the whole thing off, right? So depending on what you're doing, you would want, this face and this face to act as one, right? So right here on this corner, if you can think about that like a hinge, right? So instead of this being two separate pieces inside of your mesh, now what you would have inside of your UV space is you'd have one piece and then another piece, right? And these two pieces could be anywhere inside of your mesh, right? So you're getting a piece of the brickwork, maybe from the top of your not your mesh and your UV space, I meant, right? So this face here could be at the top of your UV space, and in the brickwork, and this one could be somewhere towards the bottom. The point is, it's showing you two different things, and you want it to act like one piece, right? Instead of two separate pieces, right? So instead of, what you have here, right? You want this face, both of these faces here, to look more like a longer piece like this that actually just has, maybe a line. These are actually two faces, something like that. So basically, like you just unfolded it. All right. So you can think about when we mark our seams, what we're doing there is it's basically like a knife. You can think of it like a knife. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is like I said, it's a really hard thing to explain. I really struggle explaining this sometimes. All right. I'm going to look at the bottom of this post here. Okay. Now with unwrapping, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep myself in edge select. Okay. And we're going to unwrap the bottom of this post so it unwraps in one piece. Now, is it completely necessary that that it remains in one piece? No, it's not. It doesn't. It's not necessary at all. All right. But when you start getting into things like, say, wood grains, right? Like if you take this window, for example, right? Now this is going to have a wood grain on it if that's the way I choose to do it. If I want, you have to have some forethought in your project of what your textures are going to be, right? Are you going to use brick, or are you going to use some kind of vinyl siding? Are you going to use concrete? What are the textures? What are you thinking for the trim work? If it's going to be, wood with a visible wood grain. All right. Now the wood grain, this is a very bad grain, but if you could think about it like this is going in this direction. Well, you wouldn't want this top piece. You don't want the grain to go in the same direction, right? That wouldn't look right. You want it to go this way, side to side, right? Because that's the way the wood grain goes. And then the same with this. There's a direction that you want it to face. All right. So when you unwrap these, what I would be doing is I would be unwrapping these as separate pieces. Okay. So this be unwrapped separately from this, separately from this, separately from this. I wouldn't unwrap it as one big square where, like all four of these, well, that's a bad example, but all four of these are unwrapped as one, right? Because then you would get a difference in textures as far as like the grain, if you think about it, if you go into your UV space, right, your UV space ultimately is going to be, you'll be able to see what your texture is, right? So if this texture was nothing but, wood grain, man, that is bad grain, but wood grain that went like that, right? If you were to overlay, a square window across that, right? Like so, I should have done that in a different color, but that's fine. You can see what's going to happen, right? So here for your vertical edges is going to pick up the wood grain going in the direction you want it to, but the horizontals are still going to have the same grain and it's not going to look right, right? You want this horizontal to be flipped 90 degrees, right? So when you do these separately, when you mark up the seams so that they're separate, you can do that, right? You have the option of spinning these faces inside of your UV space to get them lined up the way that you want them to reflect the changes that you want, in the texture, right? So something like brickwork that has a pattern to it, or, wood grains that has a definite pattern to it, right? It has a direction that you want it to go. All right. So like I said, that's what I mean about what needs to get unwrapped and what doesn't. So it's ultimately, it's up to you, right? So not everything needs to be unwrapped. I could technically take this bottom square here, right? The bottom of this post, and I can mark every single thing as a seam. But what it's going to do is everything is going to be a separate object inside of the UV space, right? So this square here, that'll be a separate object. This top here will be a separate object. This will be separate. This will be separate. And depending on where in that UV space it puts it, it may not look quite right in your finished product, maybe it puts this in a lighter area, right, where the wood grain looks one way, and then it sticks this in a little bit of a darker area where it doesn't look so good. All right, so you want to try to keep everything in the same ballpark area, right? And so that's what we're going to do is we're going to unwrap this as one piece, and I'll show you how I do that, right? So get ourselves an edge select, and I'm going to select the entire bottom edge. You can see that I have that whole bottom square. Now, it depends on your setup. Now, right now I can right click and then I can pick mark as seam. Now, my home computer, I can right click and just hit M because for some reason I must have a different add-on that's affecting my menus. But this one, for some reason, I guess I don't have whatever that add-on is. The other thing you can do is what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this top one here. So you can see I picked that top square, right? And all I'm doing is separating out this bottom piece here, right? Because that bottom piece is what I'm trying to separate from everything else. So I'm making cuts. Think of it like a knife, right? So I'm cutting it along the bottom and I'm going to cut it along the top. So this is cutting it out from the main mesh, right? So you can actually hit U for unwrap and then M for mark seam. All right, now from here, what I want to do is I'm just going to pick one corner, right? So I'm going to pick one corner of this, like right here, and I'm going to mark that as a seam. So what's going to happen is you can think about it. It'll basically unfold this. It's like if this was a cardboard box, think about it that way, right? So we're making a cut down the corner of that box. We'll be able to unwrap that box, be able to unfold it, right? So these edges here, this one here, and this one here, and this one here are still going to be connected because we didn't make any cuts there. So you can just sort of basically unroll it. We'll be able to lay it down flat. All right. Now there's an additional thing that I want to do there, right? Is I want to go to these little top like tabs here, right? So basically what I'm doing, instead of taking the 4 squares, I'll end up with something like it'll look sort of like this, where you'll have, instead of 4 separate squares, it'll look more like this. Okay. You'll have something like that. Now with these the top tabs that I call them tabs, but to me, it looks like the top of like a cereal box or something. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mark these edges as well, right? So I'm making a cut. Now it's still connected right here. So basically, since this is cut and this is cut, I can kind of stand that up. You can think about it like unfolding it, like I'm unfolding it in this direction, right? So when it's all said and done, I'll have a square. That'll be my square. And at the top of it, since I unfolded it, I'll have something like that. Okay. And I'm going to do that all the way around the top of that. I'm just going to pick those edges right there. I'm going to mark those. And then I'm going to mark these here. Okay. Now, like I said, it takes a little bit of practice and it takes a little bit of like forethought. That's going to be my word for today, I guess, is forethought. But you have to think ahead and to kind of visualize what it's going to look like if you were to actually cut it and start unfolding things, right? So what I should have now is something that looks like, this will be the bottom base. It'll be cut into 4 sections, right? So it'll look like this, but at the top of every one, I should have that little tab because I basically unfolded it. All right. So now if I was to take something like this and put that in my UV space, right, it would look a lot better, right? So because the way it overlays your image, all of my wood grains are going to go, you can think about it like this, like it just sort of bleeds out of one face into the next face. And the same thing with the tops. It'll be a lot more uniform looking, right? Than if this was 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 different parts, right? These 8 different pieces will be scattered about your UV mesh, and you really don't want that. It's a lot nicer if you can keep it, in one area. All right, so I'll show you how to go over to the UV space, right? We're going to go into UV editing, and I'm going to pick one of the faces here. Now I'm going to press period on my keypad and zoom in there. All right. So you can see what we have here. This here is exactly what I said we'd end up with. We have the square here. Okay. And here's that tab at the top. Oops, that's really bad. But there's the tab at the top. And then right down the line, here's the next one. Next, oops, I'm really making a mess here in my pen tool. But each one of these, you can see I have the same thing over here with the other column. There's the tab. Here's each one of the tabs. Okay. And here's each one of the faces. Now, doesn't that look a lot better, you know, in one nice unwrapped area than it does if they were just scattered about willy-nilly, right? And I can control the direction of this. If I want the grain to be a certain way, right, then I can flip these. I can, pick all these. They call this an island, right? So this here is one island because they're all connected. And you can see by zooming in on it that it's not connected to anything else, right? And that's because of where I mark my seams. I cut it. I separated it from the rest of the mesh. So it's an island by itself on my UV space. Now in our UV space, what we're trying to do ultimately is we're trying to have things be more square, straight and square is what we're looking for. Okay. Now you can see like over here, I'll give you an example here. Like if you look at all this is nice and orderly. Like what's going on here? This is all pretty nice, right? You can see I got 1, 2, 3. I got, looks like 4 sides that make up each island. Any guesses as to what that could be? All right. Well, you remember when I told you to make sure, you unwrap or not unwrap, but you mark the seams on your railing posts ahead of time. And this is why. This is just by marking them the way that we did. This is how it unwrapped it, right? So nice and straight and square, because that's what we're looking for. We're trying to get something that's more along the lines of looking like this than it is, looking like this. This is very, very bad, right? We don't want to do this. And keeping it in live view, right? When we finally done unwrapping, not unwrapping everything, but marking all our seams, I'll be able to come back here and look at my mesh. And when I see something like this, I'd be like, all right, something's not right there. I can, go into edge select. I can highlight the seam, hover back over my main window, press my period key, and I can see what edge that is. All right. I'm like, okay, well, maybe I need to mark that edge because that's not looking too good. All right. So that's why I use live unwrap. And then basically what I'll be able to do is mark it right there on the spot and see the changes in real time on whether or not that made a difference or not. If it didn't make a difference, then maybe I'll unmark that edge and then I'll go, pick a different edge. Like maybe this edge needs to be marked, or maybe this edge needs to be marked. It all depends, right? So live unwrap definitely has its uses. All right. So now with the post here, I would do the same thing for the top of the post that I did for the bottom. All right. Sometimes it's easy if you just go into X-ray mode, right? And then just pick everything like that. And I'm just separating this from the rest of the mesh. All right. And then it doesn't matter when you pick that one vertical to make your cut. Now I'm calling it making a cut, but you're just marking a seam. All right. But you can visualize it like you're cutting it. All right. You want to put that in a spot that's not as visible, right? So if I was looking at this from the back of the house, I would pick one of maybe the back seams, right? That's not visible. It's hidden on the back side of this post. I mean, of course, you'll be able to see it from this side, but 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But when possible, you want to try and hide your seams, right? Because what's going to happen is this is going to be where 2 different parts of your image come together, and they may not match up perfectly, but that's okay. All right. So like I said, oops, I didn't want to do that. I'm going to hit shift to be able to select multiples. And then I'm just going to pick those. Now, like I said, I didn't automatically go into this knowing what needed to be marked as a seam, what didn't need to be marked as a seam. It took a little bit of practice, right? A little bit of trial and error, and having that UV space open so you can look at the changes in real time helps with that, right? It definitely helps to see what's going on inside of a UV space. But, little by little, I got used to the way things look when they're unwrapped. And it all has to do about, visualizing that 3D object, and what it would look like if you were to slice it and then unfold it like a cardboard box, right? You can think about it that way. All right. And then I would do the same thing here with this post. Is I would grab just this seam here, and then I would mark that. All right. So this is actually unwrapping in three different objects, right? So we have three sections. We have this middle section here, right? That's going to be one section. Then we have the top, and then we have the bottom. So that's going to be three separate spots in our UV space. There may be a way to do it where you can get it to unwrap this whole thing as one piece, but it's not really necessary. All right. Now, what I was explaining to you earlier, like with this porch, where you can take this all as one piece, like if you wanted it to be brickwork, like say, right, and you would want these to be one piece, so you would not put a seam right here or mark a seam there, right? You would skip that part of it, and this way it would unwrap it as one piece. But you need to pick and choose when you want to do this, right? So let's say like the edges, you can see I marked the corner of my house because that house would be so big when you unwrap it as one piece, it would just extend outside of my my UV space. All right. Now, if you're doing something like if you're using a texture atlas like they have for Giants, Giants Head or the base game textures, that's not such a big deal because you can, extend outside of that image, outside of that texture, right? Because of the way it tiles. But I'm going into Substance Painter with this, and my images aren't going to tile like that, right? I only have a very limited space to work with, which is that 2048 by 2048. And I'm going to take up as much of the space as I can, but not so much that it's shrinking it down. You follow what I'm saying? If I was to unwrap this whole house in four, just one piece, all four sides in one piece, it would squeeze it down to fit it inside of my 2048 by 2048. But the operative word there is it's squeezing it down, and I'm losing some resolution when it does that. So maybe I would do two sides, but generally not. I generally keep it. I unwrap all four sides separately, right? Because this way, I can always line them up inside of whatever program I'm using, which would be Substance Painter. All right. And then I would go through and I would pick anything that I know is getting separate. I want separate from the mesh. Now you can see what I did here is I highlighted this here, right? The bottom of my foundation. And then the reason for that is because I want this piece to be separate. This texture is going to be different than what's up here. Right up here is going to be some sort of like vinyl siding or wooden siding, but down here it's not, it's concrete. So I don't want these to be one piece. I want them to be two separate pieces so I can do something different, different with them in two different areas of my UV space. Okay. So that's why I marked that seam that I did there. All right. And then I would just go through and mark out the rest of the house here. All right. Now you need to keep in mind like certain things, like say this roof, right? So the top of the roof, I'm going to want to be like a shingle, some kind of asphalt shingles, right? The bottom side, maybe some kind of either vinyl or a wood. And then the same thing, with this side here, it's either going to be maybe wood or vinyl. Now, since I know this texture up here is going to be different from whatever textures I'm using here, I automatically know that I'm going to want a seam here, right? Now, an easy way to do this would be just to hit that whole face and then hit U and an M, and then you just marked all four of your seams as one. All right. Now, let's say I'm going to use a wood material here, but I want this to be the same type of wood, right? So it's just going to look like it looks like it's one piece. All right. So then I would skip putting a seam right here because that would make a cut. Instead, I would just leave it sort of like this, right? I'd mark that right here. Okay, so I left this seam go, and that's going to wrap my texture right around. It's going to treat this like as one piece, like one big board. All right, but if I didn't, like say I wanted wood under here, and then I wanted to use some kind of like vinyl flashing or something here, then I would mark that seam, and then I would have three different areas. So basically you're just kind of thinking of what textures you want to use where, right? There's like I said, that's some thought needs to go into that. All right. And then I would just mark up the rest of my edges like so. Same thing with the windows. Okay. So when I get over here to the windows, I'm going to mark the edges of my windows. Now going in and out of X-ray, like I said, it helps to make sure you got everything. because I want to separate this window from everything else. All right, so I'm going to mark that. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to grab all these corners, right? Because the corners is what's going to separate these 4 pieces, the 1, 2, 3, and 4 pieces. All right, it's going to help me separate those. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into face select, grab the windows, and I'll mark those. All right, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to grab these edges here. All right, I'm going to mark those. Now with these here, right, you can see this line here and this line here. I have these here because the trim, that's generally all the thicker trim is, right? So this texture inside of here would be something different. It'd either be like a bare wood, while this out here was like a white trim, or you can do it like I do this sometimes, or I'll go through and I'll grab this line and then I'll just dissolve it and I'll treat this as one big piece, right? So this will be all white. Now what I'll want is, because it's all one piece, is I want this outside edge here, this edge here, and this to all act as one piece, right? So that's all going to unwrap as, like I said, one piece. So that's basically all the, you can see just by looking at what I have highlighted, you can see where your seams need to go, right? So I have one going down this edge, one going right here. You know, I skipped one here because I want this to be part of the main object. This I want to be part of that object. So I skipped those seams and then I made a cut here. Okay, so it's kind of easy, not easy, but after a while, you'll get the hang of where your cuts need to go and where they don't need to go. Now, little things are going to trip you up along the way, like the inside of these corners, right? So you want to make sure that you're getting all that stuff. And in the end, when we're done, I'll show you why that unwrapping, the live unwrapping, is very helpful in figuring out, you know, what happened to your mesh or what needs to be fixed, right? So if we go back over here, we'll pick a window that, let's get into face select just so I can pick something here, right? We'll find it on our mesh. Now, this is what a window looks like before it's been unwrapped, like UV unwrapped, okay? Yeah, doesn't look so great. And that is our window, right? Or that's a window, I should say, over here. Let me pick one over here instead, right? So that's the exact window exactly next to the one we were just working on. All right, still doesn't look that great. It's a little bit wonky. And you got to keep in mind that when your faces are like out of whack, right? If they're crooked or if they're wavy or anything like that, that's going to reflect in your finished product, right? Your textures are also going to look wavy and crooked and everything else. So that's why I said everything wants to be square and straight is ultimately what you're shooting for. All right. So if we pick the window that we just unwrapped, all right, now you can see it's all in pieces, right? So that's my side piece here. Okay. That's a piece of my trim. And you can see how it unwrapped it as in one piece, right? So if we zoom in a little bit, this is the outside edge right there. All right. This is the piece that faces outside. And then here's our inner piece, right? So it's unwrapped all as one piece and it looks nice. It's all nice and square. So if we were to overlay a wood grain, it would all be heading in the same direction. Now this top one here that runs horizontally, right now, that's probably not the way I would want that to go. I would probably flip this 90 degrees. All right. So when I'm all done cutting up my house, you can manipulate your UV space, right? So I hit R for rotate and then 90 for 90 degrees. And then when I pack my mesh, that'll pack that in really nicely in the direction that I want it to face, right? So if I left that, actually, no, that would be correct the way that it was. So as an example, you can rotate it, right? Because if you kind of visualize a wood grain here, the wood grain would be running up and down and you want it to go in that direction, right? So that's, when you lay it on your mesh, it'll be pointing in the right direction. If I was to spin that, it wouldn't look right. But there are plenty of instances where I will come back to my UV space and I will start flipping things in the direction that I want them to go. And I'll show you exactly how I do that when we get to that point. But you can see little by little, right, as we're unwrapping things are really starting to look nice, right? So everything it's square. It's, nice and straight. They're not wavy, right? And we're getting away from this mess here. So you can tell with this mess here, there's definitely things that need to be marked as seams. All right. Now, on the flip side of the coin of marking a seam, if you have something that, like, say, I marked this by accident, right? And I marked that, and I'm thinking, shoot, I didn't want that marked. All right. You can just as easily highlight that seam, right click, and clear seam. All right. The other thing you can do, and the way that I have this set up, like I said, on my home computer, I can right click and then just hit M, which makes things really, really easy. Right click M, right click M, right click M. But I can't do that here. I just use U and an M. But the clear seam, I would still have to right click and then pick it out of the list. But what you could do is just assign that to your quick shortcuts. So you go to clear seam, right click, and then I already have it added, but you right here it would say add to quick favorites. Okay. So if this was already marked and I decide, I don't want that, I can just hit a Q and then C, and then that's it. I cleared the seam. So using your shortcuts, utilizing your shortcuts is definitely going to come in handy for you guys. And then, like I said, repetition. Once you get used to, what needs to be unwrapped. Oops, I didn't want to do that. And when I say unwrap, what needs to be marked as a seam is what I'm talking about. So what you have to mark and what you don't have to mark to get the look that you want. That repetition is really going to make a difference down the road. Things are going to start coming together as far as, getting better at unwrapping, right? It'll all start to make a lot more sense to you guys. Like I said, and when you get into dozens of houses later, you're definitely going to have a hang of, unwrapping at least the houses. So when I get into different objects, I have to think about it a little bit more to, make sure everything that I want marked as a seam, it's going to unwrap exactly the way I want it to. All right. Because it's something I'm unfamiliar with. So you have to put some thought into it. Just like you're going to have to put a little bit of thought into your houses because, maybe you haven't, unwrapped any houses yet. So this is it. I'm just, marking the pieces where I know, I want them separate. Where I want them separated in my UV space because they're all going to be like a separate texture is going to go there. Now this foundation, I may not necessarily want to run up into the porch. You can make these decisions as you go. Maybe a vertical seam here would be okay. And I'd have the foundation over here, but I would have, regular siding over here. But I think I'm going to leave that as is. All right. So what do you think? Do you guys maybe have a gist of the unwrapping? I'll show you a little bit more in the next video. But right now, again, we're approaching an hour. This is a process, right? So not everybody likes unwrapping. It's one of those things that people love to hate. So you may or may not fall into that category. It's tedious. It can be very, very tedious, but it's extremely necessary because everything must get unwrapped. All right. In the next video, I will show you there are programs or add-ons that you can download and install to assist you in the unwrapping process. But some work, not some, but they work better on some projects than they do on other projects. Let's put it that way. Now, I do have programs or add-ons, and I'll show you really quickly what one of them is because we really are out of time. But one of them is called Unwrap Me or Auto UV Seams, right? So basically, it does the unwrapping for you. It marks all your seams. Now, it's $35 for an individual user. I do own a copy, and I rarely use it. Now, for something like the house that we're working on, a very simple unwrapping process, marking your seams. Again, it can be tedious, but it's not going to break you. It's not that bad, right? But when you get into like sculpting or something super, super intricate, right? It has so many different parts on it, right? That's when you want to get into something like Unwrap Me. So my recommendation right now is to just learn this by hand. It's a skill that it's going to come in very, very handy, right? So as we near completion on the unwrapping, I'll be able to show you a lot more of what's going on inside of our UV space, right? On how to fix ultimately what we want our UV space to look like, right? I'll show you what that should look like and how to fix things that aren't really looking the way we want them to look. Okay. So in between now and my next video, which hopefully is going to be a lot sooner than this one was, way too much time passed in between this video. Go ahead and whatever project you're working on, if you're following along with this house, experiment while you're unwrapping. Make sure your live unwrapping is turned on. Go ahead and experiment and start marking all your seams and see how things are shaping up. Right, get used to the way things look and feel. When you mark them. If you want, keep the UV editing window open, and you can see the changes that are being made in real time. As you mark seams. Right, you'll see this mesh finally, starting to come together little by little. Your UV space will be looking a lot more organized. All right, but anyhow, point being, just go ahead and keep moving forward with your UV unwrapping. I may do a little bit of work in between now and my next video, so you don't have to watch me unwrap an entire house. If I have some things to explain, I'll definitely do it when we get there. But for now, like I said, practice, 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 and I will see you very shortly on the next video. With that being said, I am Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.